Hi, this is Johannes Buzasi, Managing Director at Fischer Appelt, and you're listening to IP Fridays.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of IP Fridays. Our names are Ken Suzanne and Rolf Claessen, and this is the podcast dedicated to intellectual property. It does not matter where you are from, in-house or private practice, novice or expert. We will help you stay up to date with current topics in the fields of trademarks, patents, design and copyright, discover useful tools, and much more.
Welcome to episode 83 of IP Fridays. First of all, I must apologize. I have skipped last week's Friday. In my real life, I'm a really busy patent attorney and also father of three, so I just didn't have time last week. Unfortunately, I'm very sorry about that. And I must say I'm very grateful that you are listening. There are so many great podcasts out there, and you chose our podcast to listen to. So thank you very much for listening to our podcast, IP Fridays. Thank you very much. Today's interview guest is Johannes Buzasi, who is the Managing Director of Fischer Appelt, a content marketing and public relations agency in Germany, one of the biggest agencies in this field. But before we jump into the interview, I want to give you some updates of things that happened in the intellectual property world in the last weeks. Paul McCartney has reached a confidential settlement of his lawsuit against Sony. He has sued Sony on January 18th for a declaration that he could reclaim more than 260 copyrights, including for songs credited to him and John Lennon, such as I Want to Hold Your Hand, Yesterday, or Hey Jude. The European Patent Office has published the first ever quality report. In this report, the office also documents staff recruitment policies, training, documentation, and electronic tools in the patent process, and also covers topics such as the EPO's customer service and the Early Certainty Timeliness Initiative. As you might recall, the EPO has obtained an ISO 9001 certification and is proud of its quality procedures, and it is a hot topic in the European Patent Office. As you may also recall is that the staff of the EPO is still on strike on a regular basis. Then I also have two news items for you from the Unified Patent Court. The UK has deposited the documents required to apply for the protocol to the agreement on a Unified Patent Court on a provisional application, so that the UK seems to have ratified the agreement. This was published on the website of the UPC on July the 7th on 2017. Another news release on the UPC website dated 27 of June 2017 officially confirms that Germany seems to have added another layer of complexity. A suit has been lodged in the German Constitutional Court concerning the German ratification of the UPCA, the UPC agreement. And unfortunately, this has brought a pause to the German ratification of the UPCA and the protocol on provisional application. However, the chairman of the UPC, Alexander Ramsey, is hopeful that the UPC will start their operation soon. He currently assumes that the opt-out procedure will start 2018, followed by the entry into force of the UPCA, so that the UPC will become operational. So let's jump into the interview with Johannes Buzasi. I am very excited to be joined by Johannes Buzasi today. If you don't know who Johannes Buzasi is, he is the Managing Director of Fischer Appelt and the advertising unit Furore. Thank you for being on the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Maybe first you can tell our listeners what Fischer Appelt Furore is doing.
Sure. So I'm from Fischer Appelt. We are a group of 7 agencies. We're an independent agency network, if you want to call us that. We are every agency focuses on a different discipline. So there's an agency for PR, an agency for advertising, one for design, one for strategy, one for event, and one is a film production. And we try to create modern, integrated communication campaigns. We are fairly large, so approximately 500 people all over Germany in six offices. And that's what we do. It's a pretty multi-channel agency setting.
Great. Today I want to talk with you about brand creation and brand development, because that's something that might be most interesting to our listeners some of them are into trademarks, and maybe that would be cool for them to hear. So how would you as Fischer Appel start a brand creation process? Are there any steps even before you look into the name?
Yes, so we usually don't start with from a legal perspective. We usually start from a perspective from our clients, and they come to us asking, they have a need or a pain or a certain problem situation where they want to come up with a problem. And most of the time they have a pretty clear understanding in which direction they want to develop a brand or a naming. And what we do is we try to at first understand our client's perspective on the topic and try to get into that field and try to find out where they come from, what's their organizational need or their need coming from the inside out. Why do they do what they want to do, or why do they want to do what they want to do? And then the second thing is that we look at the market, and that's usually done in our strategy department, where we screen the competition, where we try to find out what's going on in the field right now, what are trends, what is it that consumers want, are there any developments right now that we need to incorporate. So try to get a good perspective on the other competitors, other brands, other players in that field, and also what is it that consumers really want. And then we develop a package filled with information and analysis of all this, and give it to creative people who try to really kind of understand the situation and then work on the task. And so this is where we usually try to have three perspectives on each problem. So there's usually the perspective of the consumer, there's the perspective of our client, and then there's the perspective of the idea. And it's always important to develop our ideas or our names or brands out of these three perspectives, because we believe that it's very important to have all these three in line and try to make sure that every perspective is part of the solution. And so this is how we iterate our process, and how we try to get as close towards a solution as we can. And then oftentimes, after a fairly short amount of time, we try to discuss these thoughts with our clients, because it's always much easier to stay in touch with their thinking, and try to also see if we're on the right track, and see if that's what the direction that they really imagined down the road. And so this takes 2, 3, 5 steps of iteration to come towards a solution where we spin ideas, where we try out things, where we prototype stuff, and try to get or work us towards a solution. And this is always done with different departments, with strategy people, with creative people, with account people, and also, as I've mentioned before, with people from the client side to also incorporate that perspective. And so it's trial and error. It's a lot of trying out. It's a lot of just doing things and writing down things and making long lists of stuff. And I think that's actually part of the solutions, and that's, I think, very important. Is it's always about quantity. So it's usually not that you wake up in the middle of the night and say, this is the solution. It's always, you have to work really hard and write as many or develop as many solutions as possible to try to find the right one. It's usually not the first idea is the best idea, but it's 200th idea that's the best solution. So you have to work really hard to get towards that. And if it's about names, you have to develop as many names as you can and go really on quantity to get to a good solution.
So once we talk about names, there are different approaches how to develop names, basically. And you say you want to develop as many as you can. What is your approach? How does that work at Fischer Appelt? How do you develop all these name candidates, basically?
Yeah. So as I said, it's very important to narrow down the field through analysis, through strategy, to say this is the direction we want to define the field when it comes to tonality or things you want to say, also the messaging and all these, to just have a very clear strategic understanding of what you want to do. And then once you have, outlined this field where you can work in, you have to really just push a button and have as many as creative people as you can to develop different solutions and possibilities and try to come up with a lot of things. And then narrow it down to a short list and then try to debate if these work or not.
Right. And once you have like a list of a few candidates, let's say you have narrowed it down, then you need to probably do a lot of checks and analysis on these remaining candidates. What do you usually do at Fischer Appelt?
Sure. So there's a lot of Google actually involved in this process then to just try to find out, okay, has it been used? Some other, is there a competitor using the same thing, the same name? And we use this and some other databases just to find out if it's been used before, if there are some infringements there. But it's mostly done at this stage, it's mostly done in-house. So at that point, we wouldn't talk to lawyers or we wouldn't talk to the legal department from our client side. This is just the first check for us to get a feeling, is there anything obvious there, and try to narrow or sort these out that are directly linked to any other brand or corporation. So that's just from a legal perspective, I guess, very rough screening for us to look if the thoughts we have, if the ideas that we have are workable. But this is not about getting a hard legal assessment on the ideas.
Right. And would you also look at like linguistic things, like if the names mean anything strange in other languages and these kinds of other checks, let's say?
Yes, we do this. It always depends on the task and the agency set or the setting in general. We do these things with other agencies mostly, or with offices like translation offices here in Germany, to try to find out if there's a problem somewhere. But that's mostly done at a point where the client specifically says, okay, this is one or two solutions. We wouldn't do this if we have already 5 or 6. So it's just if we have it narrowed down to a very small number of choices, and then say, okay, now let's really try to find out if there's any complications with other languages. So mostly the linguistic checks are done in closely to the real legal checks, when also all lawyers or the client's lawyers look into the legal part of these names. But that's actually pretty far down the road. We wouldn't do this in the first step. It's something that we say, okay, this is really close to a solution. Now let's do a check if there are any problems somewhere in a far different country that we have to find out, because that involves that involves costs, and so clients really do this just towards the end when they're pretty sure that this is a good solution for them.
Yes, I understand. It is a the same experience that I made so far.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. So then when you deal with the liability when checking names, that seems to be a constant struggle between the agencies and their clients, like who is liable for risks from
Yeah.
the analysis. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a constant discussion we have. I mean, that's our lawyer is really fast, and if we get a new contract with from a client, that's the first thing we all check is how do we deal with liability, because that's a constant debate. And my experience is that you have to find a practical way to deal with that, because you can never, especially if you're that early in this kind of, or if you start a brand creation process, it's very important for us not to have that many stop signs. So it's very important just to have a wide horizon and to really have all the opportunities out there and not to constantly stop and check. So it's very important for us to have a flow in the creation of things. But sure, once we talk to clients, it's a constant issue. We have to always come up with a compromise here, because liability is important, and we understand our clients want to have the least risk that's possible, but it's also a matter of costs again, and so we always try to come up with a pragmatic approach. So we most of the time we agree on a first search in some databases, on some like a Google search, and then we would recommend a in-depth legal research. But we can't, because we can't start from the very beginning, and we can't guarantee a worldwide liable solutions all the time. So we have to find a pragmatic way here, and this is always an issue, and we have to always talk to our clients and their legal departments and try to come up with a good pragmatic solution that gives us the freedom in the development, that gives us that's cost-wise interesting for both parties, but that's also ensuring that we find the problems whenever there should be a problem.
Right. When you launch a new product for a client, what, in your opinion, is important when launching the new product with a new name? And what would be the core takeaways for our listeners from your experience?
You mean what's important concerning the name in itself, or the...
Yeah, and positioning the new brand in the market, and what do you do before the launch, during the launch, after the launch? What are the most important, let's say, things that to consider, or what do you see as the most difficult things, or the biggest mistakes other people make that you see them make? Or like you launched a lot of products and new brands into the market, and maybe you gained a lot of experience during doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's always an art to do a good launch, because you have to it's not you have to do some testing, and you have to try to minimize the risk as much as you can, but it's never a risk-free task, and it's never something you can completely steer through. There's always something that that you can't foresee, and there's always something that you can test. And I think it's very important for professionals who do or who launch a new product to have a good, not just tests and not just rational arguments, but also to have a good gut feeling. Because in a way, what we do is we have a creative product, or a naming, or anything we do is still got to do something with humans, and it's not something that you can completely understand, or that you can have a complete rational argumentation behind everything. I mean, it's very important to have this argument behind it. They have a rationality behind it, but it's also, there's always 10% that you can't argue about, or that you can't. It's just it's something that you have to feel, and I think that's very important for agencies and clients to take that risk. And I'd say the good agencies and the clients who know how to do a good launch, they all weren't afraid to take this leap and really do something that's, has a little emotion or something to that you can't explain. That's just, little magic. And I think that's our business, is to do magic and to create things that resonate with people. And that's something that you always have to, risk every time you do that. And so I don't know, it's something that that's part of the job that's very exciting. And that's also part of the job that's very frightening, because you can't completely control it. And I know that's probably for your listeners who are lawyers, it's not, I don't know if that's totally scary, because, there's, I suppose it's a lot about having control over things and kind of, being in charge of things. But a creative product in the end is always, I don't know, has to have this magic. And that's something that you can't explain, and that you have to have that feeling for, or that you want to go for. And so you have to try. And I think that's part of the job.
Well, I think as a lawyer, brands are all about emotions. About 90% of the brand is just emotion and nothing rational to it, or a lot of times. I think I see the job of the lawyers just to give the vehicle to launch the brand. But the agency's job is how to really create the brand and live the brand and bring it to life and position it in the market and so on. That's all about emotions and not so much about rational decisions or something. No,
that's what I mean. I mean, you have to, in order to come up with a choice or with an idea, there has to be a rational analysis. So you have to give a lot of thought into it, and you can also do testing, and you can talk to, do a study on how, if it works with the target groups or not. But in the end, I think it's, like you say, it's totally about doing something irrational and creating an emotion. And I think that's always a leap of faith to actually do that.
Right. And then once a new brand is launched, that needs good care and tender and development. And so what would be your advice to clearly position a brand among a lot of competitors in a competitive environment? What would be, probably you also had a lot of lessons learned in this field.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Of course, you have to have a good product or some unique selling proposition that's really, it's got to be, you have to have something good or a good benefit or good promise for the consumer, so they can access your product or your service or whatever. So that's basic. But once you have a good brand and once you want to position it, I think one of the most important things you have to have is attitude. You have to have an attitude of how you want to communicate. You should be, should have some strength, and one shouldn't be too shy about things. So I think it's a good standpoint or a good point of view on how to do things, and to be ambitious in the communication and be ambitious in how to play the field and how to play out the brand. That's very important. And just to really push brands and to push the communication. That's I think very important.
Right. All right. That has been a very fascinating, interesting interview for our listeners, I guess, because they rarely hear from the agency side. They always just are amongst the lawyers, and they don't get much feedback from the agencies. So I think that was very helpful. If people wanted to reach you and learn more about you, where could they find you?
Sure. Head to fischerappelt.com or DE and send us an email. You can find our contact dates on the website.
Yes, I will include a link to your website in the show notes.
Perfect.
Well, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks a lot. Great talk.
That's it for this episode. If you liked what you heard, please show us your love by visiting ipfridays.com/love and tweet a link to this show. We would be so grateful if you would do that. It would help us out to get the word out. Also, please subscribe to our podcast at ipfridays.com or on iTunes or Stitcher.com. If you have a question or want to be featured in one of the upcoming episodes, please send us your feedback at ipfridays.com/feedback. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes. You can go to ipfridays.com/iTunes and it will take you right to the correct page on iTunes. If you want to get mentioned on this podcast or even have comments within the next episode, please leave us your voicemail at ipfridays.com/voicemail. You have been listening to an episode of IP Fridays. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by their respective law firms. None of the content should be considered legal advice. The IP Fridays podcast should not be construed as legal advice or legal opinion on any specific facts or circumstances. The contents of this podcast are intended for general informational purposes only, and you are urged to consult your own lawyer on any specific legal questions. As always, consult a lawyer or patent or trademark attorney. Copyright 2014, all rights reserved.